The email arrived at 6:42 a.m. Subject line, final notice before legal escalation. No prior warning, no conversation, just a demand, $2,750 for incompliant exterior modifications. We stared at the number longer than the explanation beneath it, because nothing about our home had changed, and nothing about the tone felt accidental. Attached were 3 photos, one of our driveway, one of our mailbox, one of our front door, each circled in red. The violation? Unauthorized aesthetic alteration. The alteration? A freshly painted door, the same color it had been for 5 years. Just pay it. That's what 2 neighbors told us. It's not worth the stress. HOA always wins. They said it casually, almost rehearsed. Like this wasn't the first time someone had been cornered into compliance by exhaustion. But something about the phrasing bothered us. Not fight it, not review it, just pay it. We requested documentation, architectural review records, prior violation history, the specific bylaw cited. 3 days later, we received a single paragraph response. No clause reference, no approval logs, just a restatement of the amount due, escalation fee included. Then the second notice arrived. The amount had increased, $3,150, a processing adjustment, no explanation, no hearing scheduled, just a deadline. 10 days, or a lien filing would begin. That's when we understood. This wasn't about the door. It wasn't about compliance. It was about momentum. Because once fear sets in, payment follows, and once payment follows, questions disappear. We calculated the real cost, not just the fine, but precedent. If we paid without citation, what would stop the next one? And the one after that? A system doesn't need to be correct. It just needs to be unchallenged. So we didn't pay. Not yet. Instead, we drafted a formal dispute, certified mail, clause request, demand for enforcement history across comparable properties. If this was procedural, we would treat it procedurally, because sometimes the most expensive decision is the one everyone tells you is easier. The certified letter was signed for at 10:13 a.m. We tracked it, waited. 3 days later, an email arrived. Your dispute has been received. No acknowledgement of our clause request, no mention of enforcement history. Just a hearing date, 7 days away. The hearing packet arrived the night before, 47 pages, most of it generic policy language, highlighted sections with no page references, screenshots of our home pulled from Google Street View, not recent photos, not inspection reports, archived images, and still no specific bylaw cited. Didn't panic, we annotated, page numbers added, missing references circled. We printed the governing documents directly from the association website, cross-checked amendment filings with county records. There was no update, no revision, no new aesthetic standard, nothing authorizing discretionary recolor classification. Karen sat at the center, binder open, tabs color-coded, measured smile. We are protecting neighborhood harmony, she began. We waited until she finished, then asked one question. Can you please cite the exact clause authorizing this fine? Silence, paper flipping, a pause just slightly too long. A board member leaned toward her, whispered something. Karen adjusted. It falls under interpretive authority granted to the board. We asked for the amendment date granting that authority. Another pause. There wasn't one. Interpretive authority had never been expanded. It had simply been assumed. And that's when the room shifted. Because this wasn't enforcement, it was improvisation. Policies weren't being applied, they were being stretched. And stretch enough, you eventually snap documentation in half. The association's attorney, attending virtually, finally spoke. If citation cannot be clearly demonstrated, collection escalation carries exposure risk. Exposure risk. Legal language for liability, not just ours, theirs. The room felt smaller after that. Shate recessed for private discussion, 15 minutes. When they returned, Karen didn't speak. The vice president did. Enforcement action will be temporarily suspended pending internal review. Not dismissed, not yet, but paused. And sometimes a pause is the first crack in a system built on urgency. The internal review was supposed to take 2 weeks. It took 4. No updates, no status emails, just silence. Until a neighbor knocked on our door one evening. Same violation, different reason, different amount, same phrasing, unauthorized aesthetic alteration. That's when this stopped being personal. We compared letters at our kitchen table, same formatting, same escalation language, even the same typo in paragraph 3, only the alleged violation changed. Driveway edging, mailbox height, window trim tone, and just like ours, no clause citations attached. We created a spreadsheet, address, violation type, amount fined, clause cited. Hearing outcome, Within a week, 6 households had quietly contributed copies. 4 had already paid. 2 were afraid to attend hearings, not because they were wrong, because they were tired. We submitted a second formal request, this time broader. Demand for enforcement history across the last 18 months. Total fines issued, total fines collected, number escalated to lien status. We copied the association's attorney and requested delivery within statutory response timelines. 3 days later, a letter arrived, not from Karen, from legal counsel. The review had uncovered procedural inconsistencies. Enforcement actions were being suspended association-wide, pending governance clarification, not reversed, suspended, carefully worded, legally contained. Procedural inconsistencies. That's what happens when authority expands quietly, when interpretation replaces amendment, when urgency replaces documentation, and when residents assume resistance is pointless. It wasn't the fine that created risk, it was repetition, because repetition becomes pattern, and pattern becomes liability. An emergency board meeting was scheduled. Attendance tripled, not because of our door, but because of transparency. Whispers circulated about reserve funds, about legal exposure, about insurance carriers requiring formal compliance structures. This wasn't about $2,750 anymore. It was about governance stability. Karen arrived that night without her usual binder, just a folder, thinner, quieter, measured. The vice president opened with a statement. A third-party audit has been commissioned. Not optional, not symbolic, independent, and public. They said just pay it. But once we refused, the system had to prove itself. The independent audit began quietly. No announcement, no dramatic email blast, just document transfers, bank statements, deposit records, legal invoices, a board correspondence. 3 weeks later, the findings arrived. Not emotional, not accusatory, just structured. The report outlined a pattern: inconsistent fine escalation procedures, missing authorization records, revenue projections that included anticipated enforcement income, and one phrase that changed the room: operational reliance on penalty income. Reliance, meaning fines weren't corrective, they were budgetary. Out. At the emergency meeting, attendance overflowed into the hallway. Residents weren't whispering anymore, they were reading. Page numbers quoted aloud, numbers repeated carefully, total fines issued under uncited interpretations. Total escalated without quorum documented votes. This wasn't miscommunication. It was structural overreach. The association's attorney spoke carefully. If enforcement cannot be tied to documented authority, restitution exposure increases. Restitution. That word landed heavier than liability, because restitution means repayment, not review, not reconsideration, repayment. The vote was motioned: immediate suspension of Karen as president pending removal proceedings. Independent Financial Oversight Committee installed. Mandatory bylaw amendment review before any enforcement could resume. The vote passed, unanimous, no dramatic shouting, just raised hands. Measured. Final. Karen didn't argue, didn't defend. She gathered her folder slowly. The binder that once dominated at the table was gone, because authority without documentation collapses quietly, and power built on urgency rarely survives transparency. Within 30 days, improper fines were refunded, lien threats withdrawn, governance policies rewritten, mandatory clause citation required for every future violation, and Karen, formally removed, barred from serving on the board for 5 years under revised governance rules. Not out of revenge, but precedent. They said just pay it, but what they really meant was don't look too closely. We refused. And once documentation replaced intimidation, the structure corrected itself. Now I want to ask you, have you ever been told to just pay it instead of questioning authority? Did you comply or did you push back? Share your story in the comments. Your experience might empower someone else to read before they react. And if stories like this matter to you, like the video, subscribe for the next chapter, and share this with someone who needs to hear it, because silence protects overreach, but documentation dismantles it.